So the climate crisis. This has been the hottest year on record, and I'm sure that next year will probably be the hottest year on record, and the one after that, the hottest year on record. This year, we've spent more time above a 1.5 degree average temperature increase than we have spent below it, which is very frightening for what that means in terms of climate tipping points and really how little time we have to avert ecological collapse. Against this, frankly, terrifying backdrop, what we have is a completely bananas political consensus in Westminster, where both the government and the opposition are watering down their climate plans. Rishi Sunak, because he's under pressure from his party's right flank, Keir Starmer, because who knows. And the way I wanted to, I guess, frame this question is that we've seen Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil do some quite impressive levels of mobilization. And their theory of change was if you get enough people out onto the streets, if you get enough people taking direct action and getting themselves arrested, that it creates a crisis of legitimacy for the state will be forced to respond by taking action on climate change. That hasn't been what we've been seeing. What we've seen are arrests, what we've seen are draconian anti-protest laws being introduced, much more hardcore sentencing of climate protesters, and the government and the opposition both watering down their climate commitments. I don't have anyone in particular I'm addressing this question to, so whoever wants to take it first. Do you think that we're seeing evidence that the Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil theory of change simply doesn't work, that the strategy is flawed?
Well, on Extinction Rebellion, look, I mean, I know there was quite interesting left critiques at the time in 2019, particularly kind of just, this argument of just saying people should have these confrontations which cause mass arrests, which was easy for often white activists to say, because obviously the different experiences.
I'm fine with white people getting arrested, by the way.
But I mean, it was just kind of like everyone needs to come and do this, and they didn't obviously take into account that has a differential impact on people. But what I'd say, I mean, if you look back at 2019, it was interesting because Extinction Rebellion in the polling was very unpopular. But what happened throughout 2019 is the polling showed consistently that public interest in climate went up and up and up and up and up. And that was to do with Extinction Rebellion. So it basically meant that even though often people found them irritating and annoying, it forced people to think about climate and the climate emergency. And I think that politicised a lot of people just because it forced a discussion, a debate. I mean, when I end up often, because Just Stop Oil, often when I do Good Morning Britain at some god-earthly hour, but we'll often end up, they'll say, well, Just Stop Oil is one of their favourite things to just throw in, like something's happened last night, they've invaded some, like the Wimbledon or whatever, and they go, well, everyone hates them, and I'm like, well, and then I'll just go on about the climate emergency and go, see, they've won. Because they forced the discussion on a TV show, and I don't think we should belittle that, because consciousness raising and forcing discussions about the climate emergency is a precondition to people organising and getting involved and mobilising. So I do think they've actually politicised a lot of people just by forcing it on the agenda, and I don't think it would have got those. We wouldn't have had those discussions without them. But the fact is, look, I mean, my view is, I'm sure a lot of people share this, which is under capitalism, and certainly the breed of capitalism we have now, it is not possible to resolve the climate emergency. So obviously we need a much broader movement that links together different struggles, with climate being the existential one facing human existence. So in the sense, no, obviously Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion haven't created a mass revolutionary socialist movement to overthrow the form of capitalism we have. Then obviously they haven't succeeded, because I don't think we'll be able to tackle it in a way that I think prevents mass calamity. But they have made it a central issue, which the next generation, particularly a politicised younger generation, take as an article of faith. And I don't think particularly younger millennials and Gen Z would take the climate emergency as an article of faith were it not for the struggles of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. And things like Greta Thunberg and those whole movements.
Moya?
I just want to say, I think their campaign of direct action actually has led to a revival of direct action with other struggles, and you're seeing that linked up. You saw Greta Thunberg, talking about Palestine the other day. You're seeing all these different forms of struggles within the workers' movement, within, say, Palestine, kind of actually start linking together in a way I haven't seen personally, or maybe I just haven't had my eyes open for a long time. And I think as well, just the idea of like sitting in a road, sitting in a station, locking yourself to something has come back in a big way. And I would tie that straight to Extinction Rebellion and then Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil, they have a single goal, which is they will stop their actions when the government stop funding fossil fuels and stop agreeing to fossil fuels as part of government policy. That hasn't happened. They're still locking themselves to things. They're doing exactly what they said. So they have neither failed nor succeeded. But I would say on the broader thing, yeah, they've done consciousness raising. I definitely think about the climate in a way that I didn't before. And I would say most of that is due to the direct action I see on the daily and the fact the conversation has been forced.
Michael, what do you think it would take for either an incoming Labour government or this Conservative government to actually have more ambitious climate commitments? I mean, Biden pushed through the Inflation Reduction Act, which was an incredible bit of legislation. You just name it something completely different and smuggle in all of this like green infrastructure funding. It's fucking sick. And yet there's little indication that that's going to be the direction of travel in this country. So what would it take, I guess, to force the issue for our political leadership? Or am I wrong? And is Keir Starmer actually a lot better on climate than I'm giving him credit for?
I'd say it's the one thing where we don't exactly know. You know, if there were going to be something positive, because people didn't really expect Biden to do that either, you know. So I'm not completely despondent when it comes to Keir Starmer and climate change. And that's partly because I don't really buy into the whole, you know, we'll have an incredible, disastrous climate catastrophe unless we overthrow capitalism. I think if that were the case, God, we're screwed. This is where I am more of a techno-optimist. I'm almost into geoengineering to some degree. I think probably
we paint every building white.
Well, I think we're going to at least have to brighten some clouds, which means you drop.
Does this make sense to anyone else?
Sounds like a Kate Bush song.
Yeah. So what you do is you drop very tiny water droplets, or you sort of push them up via shipping, and then that brightens the clouds over key regions such as the North Pole, and then that reflects heat back into the atmosphere, so that then the North Pole, what do we call it? The Arctic. I'd sound a bit more realistic if I was talking, not the North.
And then Santa comes out with his elves.
Yeah. Maybe he could do it while he's delivering presents. But no, I think geoengineering is going to be a very big thing very soon. And I do also think that, you know, I listen to David Wallace-Wells a lot on this. So he wrote that sort of very catastrophizing book, Uninhabitable Earth, which was like very scary to read. And basically what he says is that the science is in line with him, but actually the politics has moved much faster than he expected. And his analysis, which I pretty much share, is that we are moving in the right direction. We're just not moving nearly fast enough. So it's a little bit as if, you know, COVID comes, everyone recognizes it's going to come. We say, oh, we might need a vaccine, we might need some lockdowns, but let's do it in 5 years' time. You know, so you're sort of, everyone kind of knows what we need to do, and it is possible, but there isn't the urgency that you need. So I suppose, that's what I think is how does one bring the urgency of COVID to the question of climate? And I think that's kind of what we're missing. And it does involve like a lot of investment in green energy. I don't necessarily think it involves the overthrow of capitalism.
I mean, how much do you buy the idea that we can have action on climate change, which does significantly arrest or inhibit or prevent ecological collapse with our patterns of consumption staying the same? And when I say we, I'm talking about the human species we. I know that like no one in this room has the carbon footprint of a billionaire, unless there's a billionaire in this room, in which case please donate to Novara Media. But I do sometimes think that there is the optimism of a Green New Deal, and the thing that it's trying to obscure is that the amount that I consume as a person in the global north, the amount that I buy, will have to significantly decrease because I'm gobbling up an unfair share of the carbon budget compared to, say, someone in Bangladesh or sub-Saharan Africa.
I don't know. I mean, we are decoupling growth from emissions. So it is the case that emissions are pretty much stabilized and growth is still continuing. I mean, the bigger issue is for the developing world, and I'm very much in favor of everyone in the world getting a bit rich. So I think the degrowth narrative, to me, isn't particularly persuasive. So what we've got to talk about is how do we, as quickly as possible, move to a system whereby we can all have very fabulous qualities of life without it destroying the planet and all of our lives.
Owen, you're the one who made the point that you've got to overthrow capitalism to get action on climate crisis. You're gonna have to rebut your friend over here.
No, I don't mean that. No, what I mean is the problem we face now is not that we're going to stop a climate disaster. That's going to happen. There will be disastrous consequences now, whatever we do. It's a lagging indicator. If we suddenly had net zero right now, we would still have disastrous consequences for a long time. The question is how big the catastrophe is that we face. And I think as things stand, if you look at the indicators, a lot of them are far worse than were predicted, often by very pessimistic climate scientists. That's the problem. And so when I talk about, getting rid of, it's not that we'll all die. I don't think that was ever a realistic possibility unless there was going to be the worst possible scenario, which is basically you have this constant positive feedback loop and you end up like Venus. I don't think that's likely, hopefully, but you could still end up with an unnecessary catastrophe which imperils the lives of millions of people. And I think that in itself is something that we have to fight against. And I think if you look now at the indicators and in terms of what the predictions are in terms of drought, famine, extreme weather events, then they are worse than often very pessimistic climate scientists thought even 5 years ago. So that's my view, and that's why I think you need, and we have to argue as the left for the most drastic measures possible, because this is a case of if it isn't quite as catastrophic as we thought it was, then at least we can build a society that fuses climate justice and economic justice, and we will all benefit from that. So no, I take your point. I don't think when we talk about the worst case scenario, we're actually talking about Armageddon and the end of human existence, but we are talking about large sections of the world becoming uninhabitable and that putting huge pressures on human civilization. And I don't think we should be clear about that. That's my view.
Any final comment, Walker?
That's why we should brighten the clouds.
And requisition the jets.
Requisition the jets and brighten the clouds. I don't know what you guys are talking about half the time. So for our final subject,